So let's talk about what happens after the pitch, the 8 steps out of the 12 steps of equity fundraising that follow the pitch. Number 5 is the deep dive meeting. This is often about a 2-hour meeting. In the case of an angel group, it might be 4 or 5 of the angels that are interested out of the group in talking with you further, or it may be a deep dive meeting sitting down with an associate or a more senior partner at a venture capital firm. The exact nature of the discussion will vary from firm to firm, but in general, they want to understand a few things. They want to understand you and the rest of the management team. They want to get to know you, and they're going to be poking at you in a lot of different ways to understand you. Secondly, they're going to be trying to understand the business model. How do you make money? And dig down into that in some level of detail, more than you can get into in just a pitch. And of course, they want to understand what the financial deal is. So why do you need this much money? Is this the right terms? Poke at you a bit on the valuation issue, just to make sure that there is a deal to be done. Step 6 is resolving deal killers. This is a step that I actually inserted into the process because of the observation that due diligence is an awful lot of work, and unfortunately it can go on for quite some time only to find that the investor actually doesn't invest in this kind of company. I talk a lot more about this process in the module on due diligence, but it's an important one not only at this step, but all along the way, to make sure that all the work you're doing actually has a chance to lead to investment in your company. And now we come to step 7, due diligence. This is the killer part of the equity fundraising process. We talk a lot more about it in an entire module on due diligence, but for now I just want to make a few observations. First of all, it can be a grueling process if you're not prepared, so preparation is really important. Secondly, it's designed to uncover both unmanageable and manageable risks, some of which will need to be dealt with post-investment. Third, the process of due diligence can vary by 100 times, going from the very earliest of seed stage investments through a very large, perhaps a private equity investment of many tens of millions of dollars into an existing company. Finally, it is possible for some organizations to go overboard on due diligence and try to answer too many questions that are perhaps inappropriate for a very young company. Which brings us to the dreaded due diligence checklist. Every organization has a different set of items that they are looking for. Here's just one rendering. We go into a lot of gory detail on what each of these items means in the module on due diligence, but suffice it to say, preparing to deliver this information to investors requires a lot of homework ahead of the game. It's also worth noting that the end result of the due diligence process from the investor's standpoint often is the creation of an investment memo to share within the organization, either the angel group or the venture capital firm. This investment memo will summarize the work that the investors have done and outlines the case for investing in your company. The nature of the investment memo will vary in formality from organization to organization, but just keep in mind that it's useful to ask someone, are you going to be writing an investment memo? And if that's the case, try to see if you can make it easy for them to do that as a result of all the due diligence that you're helping them with. So as this long process of due diligence is going on, it's important to prepare for the fact that you have to keep things going back at the company. So there's a couple challenges in that regard. First of all, as you're talking to investors, you're probably going to be telling them the kind of things that are going to be happening in the next few months, and you have to make sure that you're executing on those things. So it's okay to be grand in your big concept about what the great future is going to be in the long term. However, you don't want to overstate what you think you're going to be able to accomplish in the short term, because missing some of those milestones that you told investors about is not going to look good as a part of the due diligence process. As you're proceeding through due diligence and discussions with lots of different investors, it's good to have a regular communications with all of them. I recommend to some of my clients that they start the process of doing regular monthly communications. First of the month is a good time to do it, to not only existing investors but also potential investors, to show the kind of regular communications that you're going to be really good at post-investment. If you do a really good job at that, that will set you way above most other companies out there. So you've made it through due diligence, things are still going okay at your company, and you get to number 8 out of 12, term sheet negotiation. Congratulations. Not that many companies actually get this far. In order to prepare, I highly recommend that you read this book, Venture Deals by Brad Feld. This is the single best book you can possibly read to get you ready for a very important part of the process. There is another module about term sheets, but this is really the definitive source of all the details about negotiation, and it's the best $30 you could ever spend when you're trying to get millions of dollars into your company. And maybe you thought after getting a term sheet your work is done. No, that's not true. You're only at step 9 out of 12, which is syndicate formation. It's important to understand that term sheets are not, in fact, the end of the process. For one, the term sheet typically has several outs. Sometimes the out is it's based on the successful completion of due diligence. And in other cases, a term sheet may be contingent on getting approval by either a board of directors or the group of partners. So it's best to look very closely at the term sheet to figure out how secure, how sure the term sheet is actually going to lead to a real investment. Syndication is typical in the US. Not all venture capitalists, but many, many do like to have other investors sitting around the table. So typically you like to have investors that are compatible with each other, that know and trust each other. And in that case, having a syndicate makes sense for the investors for several reasons. First of all, it helps validate their own logic on a deal. As smart as all investors think they are, they know that they're not perfect, so they like to have other smart people validating their thinking. Secondly, having a syndicate brings more dry powder for future investment rounds to the table, and that is often necessary when things, as they typically do, don't go quite as expected and the company needs more money than expected. Also, having an investment syndicate helps bring other people to the table for due diligence early on in the process, so everybody benefits, if they're sharing due diligence with each other, from each other's set of expertise. It's not always the case, I should note, that different syndication investors will actually share due diligence with each other. And finally, having other investors at the table over the long term brings other advocates for the company to help the company do whatever it needs to be successful. A couple things to keep in mind about syndication. First of all, is the investor that has given you a term sheet experienced at syndication, especially in emerging equity markets, whether that's Africa or Maine. Not all investors have lots of experience in forming syndication. So it's a good question to ask the investor that's giving you the term sheet. How much do you, the entrepreneur, need to keep your marketing hat on while you're trying to put together the syndication to pull together the entire investment round? In most cases, it is going to be necessary to keep marketing hard until you actually have everybody at the table and you actually have all of the money in the bank. And so while you have the term sheet and the syndicate is being formed, you have to keep on executing on the milestones that you've told the investors you're going to be executing on ahead of the investment. And that's tough. You're in the home stretch now. Number 10 is to get the final investment documents ready. This is an especially big process if you were doing a priced stock closing. These documents can be quite extensive, quite expensive, and it really requires an attorney who is experienced in equity investing. If you have somebody who's just beginning, they can often act, as lawyers sometimes do, very assertive, trying to show off how good a negotiator they are, and they can really screw up the process. And by the way, you are going to be paying for all of this out of the proceeds of the investment. Number 11 is the final closing. I should note that a one-time closing with all of the investors happens in a typical priced equity round. However, if you are doing convertible notes, it's possible to have a series of closings, so you don't necessarily have the whole thing happening on one day. If you do have a single closing and you've got a whole bunch of individual angel investors, make sure you know if they're traveling and you have multiple forms of communications to make sure that all the signed documents come in at the same time, because this is a thing that can delay a closing unnecessarily. And finally, after you have the closing, you have number 12 in the 12 steps of raising equity, money in the bank. As you can see, this is a very long process. So as you can see, the 12 steps it takes to raise equity funding are quite extensive. It goes on for a while and it requires a lot of preparation. So here's some final thoughts. First of all, as you're going into the process, you have to think, how am I going to keep my business moving forward during the time when I have to spend a lot of time fundraising? This is the least favorite part of the process for all entrepreneurs, and one of the big challenges is that the underlying business has to keep progressing. So how's that going to happen? Think that through. Secondly, because this process takes 6 to 12 months to get through all 12 steps to get cash in the bank, you need to make sure that you're going to have enough cash to make it through this very long sales cycle, not only because it does take that long, but also you want to be in the strongest negotiating position as possible when it comes to talking to investors about the various terms. Equity fundraising does take a long time and it's a lot of work. However, a lot of the steps along the way are actually good for your business despite the stress. Getting all of your ducks in a row, really understanding your business deeply, planning ahead, those are all really good things. And I hope you can see that preparation ahead of the process is going to be helpful for you to be competitive, because it's a very small percentage of companies that try to get equity that actually get to step 12, money in the bank. Preparation is absolutely key. Preparation will also be helpful because if you are responsive to investors, that is going to keep them enthusiastic about your company versus all the other new shiny balls that are coming in over the transom as they're trying to look at where they should be putting their money in a relatively small number of companies over the next year. So in conclusion, the 12 steps are hard. However, most of the steps along the way are good for your business.